All right. So thank you all so much for joining today. We're a pretty small group, so I will keep it very, very informal, nice and casual, and definitely stop me and let me know if you have questions. And then also if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will not be checking the chat while I go through the slides because I get very confused when I do that. So, but I will check in on them at the end. So again, thank you all for joining today. I'm really pleased to see you here, and I hope this is info that you find useful. So, all right, so here's a little piece of information about me, just so you know who's yakking at you. So my name's Emily. I got my undergraduate degree a very long time ago at Smith College. I studied East Asian Studies because I'm very practical. I have experience living and working in Japan, and I have a master's degree in counseling. I worked in higher ed for about 12 years, and this is my third year in private practice. So I know a lot about kind of career development, and I should be able to answer most of the questions you all have. If you have one that I can't answer, rest assured that I will find resources so that I can answer the questions for you after the fact. So here's kind of my thought for today. I feel like everything is so weird and confusing that we're all just feeling a little bit scared, a little bit depressed. This is, for many people, not for all of us, but for many, the first mass trauma that we've ever been through. And even those of us who've been through mass traumas before, it was things like 9/11, and they felt very different, I think, from this. A lot of people have been laid off or furloughed, and I have been talking to a lot of people who are in kind of a job search panic. I'm also talking to a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to work from home when it wasn't their decision to do that. So I really want to talk through a lot of those questions today. But the first thing I want to talk about is I know that there are a lot of people who are feeling a lot of stress. And I really feel that this is a fabulous time to be very mindful of that. And so if you know of anyone who really is needing some help around this, encourage that person not to be afraid to reach out. There's no shame in it. This is very much like if you were to get physically sick. And there's some really, really excellent resources out there for mental health resources if you are really feeling under the gun. So, and I'll send these out as well. And of course, Fran can give us some additional resources for that. This is a really stressful time, and I think most of us would probably benefit from a little bit of talking to someone. You know, we're not sleeping very well. We're kind of navigating a whole host of other things. So it's challenging times. And the other thing I want to be sure to mention is that we should all be, I think, especially mindful of what our Asian American friends and colleagues are doing here, because there really has been a big uptick in hate crimes against Asian Americans. The ones I have seen my friends experience personally are a little bit less terrifying. They're more kind of ugly hate speech. But you know, you don't have to look far. There was a woman who got acid thrown on her when she was taking out her trash. And so these are really happening. And so I just would encourage everyone to be extra mindful of this. I know that the Asian Chamber actually had a letter that a bunch of us signed, and they sent out to the local grocery stores because of just how pressing these concerns are. And if you want a really good read, John Cho just wrote something for the LA Times about this that I thought was very powerful and very insightful. And it made me love him all afresh, as though I didn't already. So check that out. I can send that out as a resource as well. But let's dive in and get to the actual content of this. So the first thing I want to address is the more urgent issues that people are facing as they go through this. And so the first piece of information I really want to encourage people is to file for unemployment. File for unemployment right away, because it's taking them some time to turn it around. But they are being very good about trying to pay benefits out quickly without a whole lot of vetting process. So normally there's a lot of processes that unemployment benefits go through to make sure that you're really in need. And it's definitely, we're seeing less of that going on because so many people are having to file. And importantly, as of Monday, people who are part of the gig economy and people who are self-employed in the state of Colorado have been able to file for unemployment benefits as well. And so if you go to the state website, there's a whole bunch of stuff there on how you do it. It's actually really easy. I did it myself, and it took me all of about 10 minutes. I had to have the last taxes I filed in front of me just so I could find that information, and it wanted a driver's license number. And other than that, you're just kind of telling them like what kinds of impacts your business has seen since then. I don't know the gig worker specifics, but I know that it's very possible. So quicker is better. If you or someone you know is really struggling with things like rent, then I would encourage them, first of all, to talk to their landlords, but there are also some resources you can find in state. Same with mortgages. I have several friends who have bought their homes in the past 10 years or so, and they've all found it very easy to defer their mortgages. But note of caution, there's apparently two kinds of deferments. And one is if your bank operates the loan for a third party. Some of those third parties are deferring it for 3 months, but then at the end of that 3 months, you owe that whole balance. So before you ask for a deferment, find out the terms on yours so that you're not suddenly on the hook for 10 grand or whatever. And then also, if you have or know someone who has lost a job recently, there are some really great resources out there for people who are looking for remote jobs. My particular favorite of these is a page called Side Hustle, but it's spelled stupid. It's Side H-U-S-L. And what I like about Side Hustle is that it's kind of designed to help people generate extra income, which is not a bad thing right now, but they also vet the different kinds of positions and employers that are out there. So for instance, it had a really nice article about how for a lot of people, being a secret shopper seems like the dream job because you go shopping at places you like and you buy merchandise, but what you buy winds up being free. And then you also get paid for, rating the place for its service. And sometimes you'll get an assignment to be a difficult customer, that kind of thing. And so you then rate the place. But what was really interesting is when I was reading the article, I found out that it's actually not very well paid. So the upshot of that was they said, if you have an expensive hobby, then by all means be a secret shopper to support that hobby because you'd be able to get all of your supplies for it, but it's not going to be a moneymaker. So Side Hustle, H-U-S-L, really good resource. There are loads of resources also for things like remote jobs and part-time jobs. And I have those all listed in my resource sheet that I will send out afterwards. Any questions so far about mental health, finding side jobs, filing for unemployment, anything like that? Please feel free as we're talking if you want to unmute yourself and chime in. If you don't want to be on the recording, just ask the question in chat and I'll find it after.
Emily, this is
Emily, go ahead, Clarence. You first, me next.
Okay. Thank you for starting, the conversation around the mental health, challenges during this really challenging time. I can also imagine very high up on that priority, particularly with couples and families, is that general sense of financial insecurity. Absolutely. Right? The potential of losing your job. It just is, obviously it's a painful feeling, right? Yeah. But they may be burning savings, right, already. Yeah. They may have a mortgage and a car payment and all these, childcare. Well, yeah. Now they're at home, and that's another conversation, right? Right. Having the kids at the home and trying to work. But can you speak to, how maybe just even one thing that a family or a couple can think through, right, or have a conversation around is that that potential job loss, or even, we may very well be heading into a recession. Yeah. Right, an economic recession. And budget cuts with companies and so forth, right? So you kind of see that writing on the wall, and it's kind of scary, right? Yeah,
it is that. So there are a few things that I would recommend for this, and one of the things I'm really encouraging people to do is to kind of go through expense lists right now, because it is very easy to burn through your savings, even though we're not doing things like going out, going to concerts, taking vacations, but it still is very easy to burn through that savings. So what I'm encouraging my clients who are very worried about this to do is to kind of go through a budget right now and go through kind of a worst case scenario budget. So for instance, what if both earners in the family lost their jobs? How much do they have in savings? How long would that take them to go through? And then what are some easy-ish places to cut? Nothing's really easy to cut, but what are some things that would be less upsetting to cut? And then kind of related to this slide, one of the things I'm really encouraging people to do as well is to start thinking about some side jobs that could be really beneficial to them. Side jobs, if you start them now, are a good potential to earn extra money just to kind of offset any job loss that might come. But also, if you do start some kind of side job or remote work and find that you really like it, that's also something that you can tool a little bit to your own needs if one or both earners in the family do lose their income. Or if you're a single person, especially if you're a single person supporting kids, you can sort of think through that and look through the options. There are a lot of things that people like me consider gap jobs to sort of fill the gap between two more formalized pieces of employment. And those are things, I have a friend who's a pastry chef. And of course, he's not getting to do very much of that right now. So he's working at Starbucks because the interaction with customers is very minimal, and he gets to have protective gear and gloves, and he just gets to hand the drinks out the window. And that feels to him like a very good side job, kind of temp job, because it's not dangerous. It doesn't take up a lot of his brain power, and it puts some structure in his day. So I would say be thinking about the kinds of things that would be acceptable gap jobs as well. And then for people who are really not able to think through that because it takes a lot of mental bandwidth, and we don't all have that right now, reach out to someone like a career counselor and just kind of talk through it. I'm offering a lot of initial free appointments because sometimes people just need a place to have a conversation. And so reach out to people like me who can help, and to professional organizations, friends, family, etc. Fran, you had one too?
Speaking of side jobs, that's interesting that you said that. On your earlier slide, when you showed the mental health first aid link, I'm actually a mental health first aid instructor. And that is one of my side gigs.
Very cool.
That I've been using. But unfortunately, at this time, we can't actually do our class. We actually had one scheduled at the end of March for the Asian Chamber.
Yeah, dang it.
But when we are able to provide those classes here in a few weeks, we can do that virtually.
Nice, yeah.
Where participants can take the class virtually, and we're working on setting that up for everyone.
Excellent. I look forward to that. That'll be a really interesting thing, and probably something.
Yeah, thank you for including that.
Yeah.
I'm really appreciative of that. Yeah.
My pleasure, my pleasure. All right, anything else before we move on? All right, excellent. So here's the thing, right? A lot of us are working from home, but the problem is, if you look up articles on working from home, many of them, the ones that happened like last year or before January, are kind of, they're making the assumption that you are working from home in a way that's voluntary, that you either accepted a position that is a work from home position, or that you've negotiated it potentially as a benefit. And of course, that's not really the case for most of us anymore. And so one of the things I'm really stressing to people is these are all really good tips for working from home. I have a friend who's posting about this really often on LinkedIn, and he has some really great tips. But the other part to keep in mind is that because this isn't something that we decided we all wanted to do, and then just one day in March we all started doing it, one of the things you'll want to do is be really mindful of treating yourself very, very gently and having different overall goals for your productivity than you would if you had decided to do this last year. That said, what I have found personally to be super helpful with my own required working from home is keeping some basic habits going. So I actually set my alarm every weekday. Now, I don't always get up. I do have those days when I decide I'm just not going to be productive, which is part of self-care. And that's fine too. But generally I get up. I try to stick with my morning routine. So when I was working out of my co-working space, I would get up, take care of the dogs, have breakfast, go to work, have a workout, and then kind of jump into my day. So I'm trying to do the same thing here. I actually spoke to someone recently who she actually worked from home on purpose, but she found that she was so mentally geared to thinking of her commute as the start of her workday that for about 6 months into her working from home, she had to get into the car and she would drive around for 10 minutes and go back home and start working. And she found she could sort of shorten that over time. And in fact, towards the end, she would just kind of go out and sit in her car for 2 minutes and then come back into the house and go into her home office and work. But those routines, I think, are really important. I've been trying to walk the dogs first thing in the morning a little bit just to kind of have a commute. And I have also been getting dressed. There are days it doesn't quite work out, but I'm at least getting dressed on the top half so that I feel like I'm really at work. I even wore earrings for you all today that you probably can't see, but it feels more like work when you do things that look like work. And this really kind of amuses me. This is my setup at home, and I think it's really funny because you can see my rice cooker in the back and my chapstick has fallen over, but I have a dedicated space for my work. Obviously, this is a table in my kitchen, which is why there's a food processor in the picture. But it's really helpful for me to have a place that is my workplace. And it's not the bed and it's not close to the television. And so I come here, I put up my little screen here and I'm in work mode. I am less effective than when I'm not under this kind of pressure, but I'm still in work mode. And then I do set up my calendar. I am very specific with my calendar. So I don't put things on there that say like resumes. I actually put in, I'll block out a half an hour and I'll say, work on Mike's resume or send interview questions to Jane, because the more general tasks that I was putting in were not working for me because I just kind of couldn't maintain my focus. I'm putting in very specific tasks. I'm also scheduling time to work out, time to eat lunch. I'm scheduling a hard end to my workday. For me, and I suspect for some of you as well, one of the biggest dangers of working from home is that the days can kind of bleed into each other and your work time can bleed into your home time. And I wanted to be really careful to guard against that, because otherwise then you're just always working and that's not fun for anyone. I was finding that I would either forget to eat my lunch or I'd want it at like 10 in the morning. So I'm really very mindful of kind of blocking out time. And one of the things I'm doing, which you don't have to do, but I find it kind of fun, is I'm putting the things I'm really looking forward to, the things that are more social in nature, in a different color on my calendar. I'm using orange because orange is such a happy color. But I'm putting in, like, I have a Zoom call I do with this group of friends that under normal circumstances I have dinner with once a week. And so I put the Zoom call in orange. I put lunch in orange just to kind of give me that little lift in my day. All right. And this is really important. So I said that I am waking up early and doing my workout. The problem is, and you'll find loads of information on this if you do any searching for this online, everyone says, get up early. But not everyone is a morning person. And so I think it's really useful to find out the time of day that you're most productive. So this link here is to, I don't remember the site, but it's a study basically of yourself. And so it kind of walks you through a bunch of tests that you can take to figure out when you're most productive and what that looks like for you. And it's really useful, I think, for people who have always had an external structure and are now dealing with, kids at home, spouses, pets, all of that stuff that's at home. It's really complicated. And so if you can figure out when you are most productive, and I think this is particularly important for anyone who has younger kids at home, ideally, hopefully you have an additional caretaker in the home with you as well, and you can kind of trade off times. But if that's the case, it's really nice for both of you to know when your most productive time of the day is. If your most productive time of the day is the same, the two of you, then you'll just have to figure out an arm wrestling competition or something to see who gets that time, or you can trade off or whatever it is. But that's kind of the reality of everything right now. And most of us never thought we'd have to homeschool our kids. So same thing as working from home. We're not necessarily prepared for it. The other thing is I am finding a lot of challenges with kind of focus and sustained attention. So I don't know if you all are familiar with the Pomodoro technique, but it is a sort of focused burst of attention technique. The guy who came up with the idea, he called it Pomodoro because he had a kitchen timer that was shaped like a tomato. Tomato is Pomodoro in Italian. And so he would set it in short bursts. And I believe the recommended burst for Pomodoro technique is 35 minutes, but find what works for you. So I've been doing that in short bursts. So I'll put in, 45 minutes of a task, and then I'll put in a break. And, I'll get up and stretch. Sometimes I'll take a walk, make a cup of tea. I'll do something that's very clearly not work. And I found that to be really helpful as well. And I'm taking a lot more breaks just in general than I have to when I'm in a normal work situation, because I have more stress, right? And there's more that is unknown. And as Clarence was saying, there are a lot of people who don't know what's coming. And so I'm getting pressure from people who are really worried about the job market. And then with that, I have my own worries. If nobody is paying for a career counselor, how am I going to pay the bills? And so there's just all of that kind of anxiety floating around out there. And that means that I'm scheduling in a lot more breaks for myself as I'm going through this. And I'm not real good at it yet, but I am trying to have more time during the day when I do things like take a 5-minute deep breathing break, practice a little bit of kind of daily mindfulness to kind of get me through. And so I say all this, but I will tell you that I think one of the really important things in this process is that you will have days when you accomplish nothing. And that is completely fine. I actually had one last week. I just woke up and I wasn't feeling very good. I wasn't feeling sick or anything, but I hadn't slept well. And I was just feeling really anxious and kind of unsettled. And at one of the times I woke up during the night, I actually turned the alarm off, and I had more of a task day, so I had a little bit of freedom around it. So I turned the alarm off, woke up when I woke up, made some toast or something, got the dogs taken care of, and then I spent the rest of the day flaked out on the couch watching reruns of Xena Warrior Princess, and it was the best thing I could have done for myself, because it gave me that space to kind of grow and heal a little bit in this weird space that we're in. And I won't say that I was like super duper productive the following day, but I was able to actually get some work done the following day. So plan for some of those to happen as well, because it's hard. Everything is it's just harder than it used to be, and harder than I think it needs to be, but we don't know how to do this. And then finally, on the topic of kind of dealing with this enforced work from home piece, I will say, try not to let yourself think of your progress as a linear path. It's not linear. You're going to have 2 really good days in a row and then 3 terrible days, and that's fine. So celebrate your little progresses, because otherwise you just start day drinking and nothing happens. Don't do that. So any questions about any of that, or shall I dive into looking for new work? All right, cool. So if you are looking for work, the first thing I really want to get out there, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that there are still employers hiring. And the truth is that even in bad recessions, there are still employers hiring. I was doing this work in 2008, and I was actually at a university during that time, and we found that we had more employers in those sort of 2.5 years when things were really bad nationally, where we were just turning employers away left and right, because so many were signing up for our job fairs, because what they were running into was people had this mindset that there weren't any companies hiring, and so they weren't getting any applicants. So they're out there. Some of them are going to be fabulous jobs that you might want to do for the rest of your life, and some of them are going to be just kind of weird little crummy jobs that you can do for the time being. If you do have to look for a gap job, I really encourage people to look for one that you can stand for a while, because we don't know how long this is going to last. So don't do something that you passionately hate, but do something that doesn't take a whole lot of your mental energy, and something that you feel like you can more or less do. There are a lot of things that you can do to kind of line yourself up to do the thing you want to do when we come out of this. So you can look at jobs that might build some skills that are the kinds of skills you will ultimately need kind of coming out of whatever kind of economic downturn we have from this. And you can look for, you can negotiate for things like a job title if you take a job that's not quite ideal for you, so that you really have something really nice to put on your resume at the end of it. There are lots of places you can go to look for remote jobs, places like Flex Jobs that are pretty good, but I will give you this one note of caution around remote jobs that most of us don't know. Often you'll see a posting for a remote job and get really excited and go to apply for it, and it will say California residents only. And people think, well, it's a remote job, why is that, right? The deal with that is that many remote employers only want to hire people who are either in-state or regional, because that way they don't have to deal with a whole bunch of different states' tax codes. Simpler for them just to hire in-state, so you can live on the opposite side of the state from them, but they only want to deal with your state's taxes. And so if you are looking for a remote job, really favor the ones that are already in-state. You have a much better chance of actually getting work in those places. And it's going to make your life a little bit easier as well, because then you also don't have to deal with tax stuff on your own end. You don't have to go in to file your taxes and then figure out whether your employer paid your state taxes or whether you have to do that and you're on the hook for the state taxes at the end of it. So it will definitely kind of uncomplicate your life to look for those kinds of jobs. And the nice thing about some of those flex jobs and some of the side gigs is that they are fairly customizable. So on a week that you feel very energized and like putting in a lot of hours, there's a greater likelihood that you can do that in those jobs. And then you can take a week to kind of settle back in and you know, recapture some energy after a harder, more productive week. And again, I'll mention Side Hustle because I do think it's a really fabulous resource if you are looking just to build some extra reserves for yourself as you go through all of this. Now, here's the thing. Nobody likes to hear this, but truth is always the same. You're really going to be wanting to use this time to network as much as you can. That means different things for different people. And obviously, we're not in a situation where you're calling people up and saying, can we meet for coffee? But this is a really good time to do some networking because we're all feeling a little bit lonely. And we all are trying to figure out how to manage our time differently. And so the truth is that most jobs, estimates vary from study to study, but upwards of 70% of jobs that are out there actually never get posted on something like Indeed. So what does that mean for you as the job seeker? Well, it means that the people aren't posting those jobs because they're finding candidates for them through other methods. Recommendations from the people who already work there, people who apply directly on the company website, mentions in things like professional association meetings, a friend of the family would be good for it. Those kinds of internal connections are the way people find these jobs. And that is why some of you have probably had this frustration of finding an entry-level job posting and thinking, oh, that sounds great, I could totally do that. And then you go in and you begin applying for it, and it's asking all these questions about your experience that you don't have because it's an entry-level job, and so you thought you could have it. They put in more barriers when they get to the point of posting those jobs online because they don't want to have to pay to post those jobs online. So once they're at that point, they're going to put in kind of more stuff for you to have to deal with because they're hoping to narrow it down to kind of ideal candidates only. They don't know you at that point, and so they can't think, oh, well, but you know, Bob over there is very teachable, so he might not have this specific skill that we'd like the person to have, but I know he'll pick it up really quickly because you're an unknown quantity. And so that's why you find so many of those job applications that have huge barriers in them or ask for like 10 years of experience. And you think, but how can I get 10 years of experience if nobody will hire me? That's why. And so you're really going to want to be very mindful of networking. Again, treat yourself very gently as you go through this because this can be very tiring. But what I really tell people to do is, you can tell I haven't edited this from when I did it for the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program because it says JETS. But in general, what you want to do is reach out to people who are already somehow known to you. So you're going to start with friends and family. You're going to start with your old college roommate, someone that you've lost touch with since high school, people like that. And start easy. So start with your aunt. Oh, she teaches. I wonder what teaching is like. Would that be something I would like? Call her up or email her or whatever works. and ask to jump on a quick Zoom call. Ideally, I'm really these days all about as much face-to-face as we can all have, but the phone is fine if that's what works, and email is fine if that's what works. But reach out to people who have jobs that are interesting to you, even if only vaguely, and ask them, will you tell me about what you do? I'm kind of curious about what it looks like, and I'm wondering if it would be a good fit for me. And you want to approach this from the perspective of just an information seeker. You want to make it very clear that you're really only looking for information. The understanding is that if it's a good fit and they had a great job to offer you, you wouldn't say no, but you're not approaching it like that because that makes people uncomfortable. So you're kind of seeking information. And what you want to be doing is setting up what's called an informational interview. I'll tell you more about those in a sec, but this is a really easy way to begin to find out more about what people do, find out how those might align with your interests and your skills, and to kind of organically build your own network. It does look a little bit different, of course, because we are all doing this in virtual spaces now, but a Zoom account I don't have a free account, but there is a free Zoom account. And through that, if you want to meet one-on-one with someone, you have an unlimited time to do it. If you get more than a couple additional people on the call, it kicks you out, I think, at 40 minutes, but that's still plenty of time for an informational interview or just for some kind of general chatting with people. So look at that, look at FaceTime. I think GoToMeeting has a free version, Google Hangouts, which they were just about to close down and then all this happened. So there are loads of free ways that you can do this as well. And then of course there's just the good old-fashioned phone. So you can always reach out to people and learn what you want about their jobs. And so an informational interview is a really fabulous way to do this. And I recommend this both when we are social distancing and when we're not. When we're not, ideally you'll ask the person out for coffee. You buy them a cup of coffee and really pick their brains about, like, what do you enjoy about your job? What do you not like about your job? What kind of training do you need to get into something like this? All of the stuff that you would like to know about the job in general. And it's actually the same approach when you're using a virtual meeting tool, except that, of course, you're not buying them a cup of coffee. The piece I'm adding to this right now is I'm recommending that you ask the person their favorite local coffee shop, and then afterwards you'll send them a $5 or $10 gift card, thanking them for their time to that little local coffee shop, which also supports local businesses, and we all very much want them to survive. And then you go through this process and you just ask them all of the stuff that you wonder. And what I really like about an informational interview is you can ask stuff you would never ask in a formal interview. You can ask things like, what is the income potential of this job? You don't want to make them uncomfortable, so you don't want to say, what do you make? But you can say, what's the income potential? What does a starting salary look like in this field? What do you hate about your job? Who are the places, what are the places that are known for having a really good work culture? All of those things are, I think, really important and really matter. And to speak a little bit on culture, this is a big part of job satisfaction. So you're going to want to be asking a lot of questions about work culture. This always cracks me up. So I had this client a couple of years ago who was very excited to apply for, I don't know, OtterBox or something like that. It was one of those local companies that's very tech focused. And the reason she was so excited was they were all talking about how, as a team, they do the Tough Mudder together. Now, if you're a sane person like me, you don't even know what the Tough Mudder is. It's this crazy-ass competition where these teams get together and they go through this really grueling obstacle course, and they're like crawling in the mud and going up rope courses, and it's like this insane thing. And this client of mine was so excited. That just sounded like the best job in the world for her, and she was talking so enthusiastically about it. And I thought, you would have to pay me $4 million a year for me to accept a job like that. It sounds horrible. And this is the whole thing about culture, right? What sounds like a day trip to hell for me sounds like a dream job for someone else. And so you get to define all of those things yourself and think about how that's going to work in your own world. And before you begin the process of doing informational interviews, you also get to spend some time kind of with yourself and thinking about your values and your needs and the kinds of things that you have really enjoyed doing in your life, whether you got paid for them or not, and then approach an informational interview from that lens. Now I do have, and I'll attach this when I send this recording out, I have a worksheet for informational interviews that's just kind of, there's some background info, and then there's a list of a lot of questions that you can ask in the informational interview, but I don't want it to feel overly formal. So jot down the questions you are really, really curious about, and make sure that those, you kind of lead with those, but then you want it to become a pretty natural feeling conversation. And so, you know, the person you're talking to will say something that's really interesting to you, and you are absolutely welcome in that instance to say, oh, I never heard of that. That sounds really interesting. Tell me more about it. And sort of let the conversation flow in a way that feels really comfortable and normal. And then the trick is that at the end of each one of these informational interviews, you want to ask a couple of things. You want to ask, first of all, whether there are people that that person knows that you should talk to about more of this kind of information. And then you also want to ask if you can get that person's name and contact info right then and there, because people have really good intentions and will say, oh yeah, I'll introduce you to my friend Beverly. She's great. You'll like her. And then they'll forget. And it's awkward. Do it anyway. If that's what the person says, follow up anyway if they haven't. Hey, you remember you said you're going to introduce me to Beverly? Just wondering where that's going. So feel free to do that a few different times. But if you can get that person's name and contact info right then and there, then you can use the info and you can reach out to them on your own. And you can say, you know, may I use your name when I reach out to this person? And it's a really good way to kind of build your network again very organically. And if you are in conversation with someone and you realize in the process of it that there's something about that particular job that doesn't fit you at all, then you get to say, this sounds really great, but I think I would be better more on the human relationship building side of things than on the accounts side of things. Do you know anyone who does that? And get recommendations for other people to talk to that way. So let it be pretty comfortable. And again, don't be too ambitious as you're setting these up to do right now. For one thing, everybody else also has fairly limited mental bandwidth. And so if you reach out to 10 people, you're going to get a lot of silence for a while. I've noticed on my end, as well as what clients are telling me, that people are responding to both social media messages and emails a lot slower. So you'll get kind of a long silence, and then suddenly you'll get 10 people who say, sure, I'm available for an information interview next Thursday. You'll think, wait, what? I can't do that. So go pretty gently with yourself into this process so that you don't get overwhelmed as you're going through it your own self, because we don't want you to feel crazy and overwhelmed. So interestingly, there are a lot of new developments that companies are kind of being forced into. And I'm sure you're all familiar with companies that were very hesitant about doing any kind of work from home options and not utilizing any of the technologies that exist out there. But there's some really cool new approaches that they're having to use because they have to still be operating, right? And there's some are doing some hiring, and what does it look like, et cetera. So there's some really interesting new approaches that a lot of places are using. I don't know if you all have seen the whiteboarding feature on Zoom, but it's really cool. It actually gives you what looks like a whiteboard, and then whoever has permission can then just write on it or draw shapes or things. And this can be really valuable if people are applying for jobs that are highly conceptual in nature or very high-tech jobs, because they might need to like write out some formulas and that sort of thing. So a really cool technique. And this is part of the Zoom package. More places are actually sending information to the candidates before an interview. Includes things like the questions, which I think is really valuable and also is a better kind of universal learning format. And they're adding things like some contact numbers in case there's a tech glitch. Most of us weren't particularly set up to work from home. And so we're on wireless connections. And if you have a hardwired connection, your connectivity is going to be better and the call isn't going to drop. But if you suddenly have an internet problem when you have an online interview, you're really glad you have that manager's phone number now, because you didn't do anything wrong. It's not like you failed to plan for time to park in an in-person interview. And so it's really good just to have that. And typically, employers are pretty flexible about finding a new way to do an interview if your technology is suddenly just not working for you. And then more places are doing virtual onboarding and training. They have some virtual office tours, which look very much like the tools that realtors are using. And I think this is a really kind of a neat thing. What you'll find is that a lot of places, though, are not particularly organized about it. I'm working with a client who, much to her surprise, got a job offer about a week and a half ago. And she was really excited, but then she reached out to me because when she got the acceptance paperwork to sign the contract, one of the things said that everyone had to do the orientation in person. And she was really anxious about this. And she's in, I don't remember where, but in one of the parts of the world that's more affected. I think it might even be New York City. And, she contacted me and she said, I'm really kind of freaking out about this. I don't know what to do. I have an immune compromised person in my immediate household that I have to be around all the time. What do I do? And I said, well, reach out to HR and say, hey, I have an immune compromised person in my house. I can't do this in-person training. What are you going to do for me? Because I want this job and you want to hire me. And so she was reaching out, she reached out to them and said, very concerned about this on-person orientation. And they got back to her and they said, you know what, we just didn't put any language in there yet. The orientation is actually virtual now. So they're just kind of being a little bit disorganized, but it doesn't mean that those safety nets aren't there. So if you, for instance, get a job offer, when something like that happens to you, do just feel free to reach out to them and say, I'm not comfortable about this, and most of the time they're going to work with you. And if they're not willing to work with you, then you know a little bit of something about who they are as an organization, and then you get to make a decision about whether that's an organization you would like to be affiliated with moving forward. But definitely, as with things like your car payments and your loan, your rent and your loans and things like that, don't be afraid to ask for help with it. So don't be afraid to ask to do all of your training virtually. Don't be afraid to ask for a payment deferment, those kinds of things. I think it's a really good pause for us in which to be really mindful of being more transparent as we move forward. And if you just are really open with people and ask for a consideration, most places that I've experienced are actually being super good about it. So I find that really comforting and kind of a little bit heartwarming. The other thing is, it's really important for us to bear in mind to be very social right now. And you'll see this is clearly a virtual happy hour. And I think it's just really important to build this time in because there's so many things that we're not able to do. I have a client I'm working with who said, oh, this COVID thing isn't really affecting me. And I said, is it really not? Because your normal stress relief is to go on a long hike. And the hiking trails around you are all closed now. Is it really not affecting you? And she kind of thought about it and said, oh, I guess it really is affecting me. And one of the things that we can all do to mitigate some of that is to have some fun virtual social things that we do. I also have some friends who live in my immediate neighborhood. And we have periodically been doing distancing wines where we sit about 10 feet apart from each other. And we each have like a little thermos of wine and we wear our masks and we kind of holler at each other, which feels social without being any danger. And we're outside when we do it. So, and we're very cautious when the wind kicks up, we all put on our masks and look around anxiously. But the social aspects are really important for us. Humans are social creatures. And this is a really essential part of self-care. What I keep telling people is solitary confinement in prison is a punishment for a reason. So be really sure that you are scheduling this time, even if it looks a little bit frivolous or indulgent to you on your calendar, because you need it and you will be much happier and saner with it. And finally, this is just my contact information. If you have any questions, if there's something you're not comfortable sharing with the group, if you just want to clarify something very specific to you with me, I'm more than glad to answer any of your questions. I'm generally finding that email is the best way for me to reach out because I just about 10 minutes ago realized that someone left me a voicemail that I haven't responded to yet because I get busy and think, oh, I'll do that later, but I don't have the visual cue of something still in my email inbox. And so I just keep forgetting to call people back. So particularly if you have a more urgent question, definitely email me about it. But I'm really glad to try to answer any questions that you all have. And Now I am going to stop this share and see what the comments are. And by the way, if you have things that you want to weigh in on, let me know as well. Okay, so we have one question here that is the platform for virtual happy hour. That particular one was Zoom. In your friend group, there's potentially someone who has a paid Zoom account. If not, you can rotate through email, so you can have 40-minute chunks and then each just get back on the call. But whatever is comfortable for you, just feel free to use that. A professional Zoom account, if it makes sense for your work, is not that expensive. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of $120 a year. I don't remember specifics, but it's not crazy expensive. If it's something that would be beneficial for your work as well, you can do that. And then you can also do things like Google Hangouts and that kind of thing as well. Other questions?
Emily, I was just going to say you can get a Zoom account and pay monthly on it, and it's on for the ones that's the next step up. It's not. It's a you can have more people on it.
Okay.
It lasts longer, and it's only, I think for me, it's like $15 a month or something.
Nice.
Like that. So,
Excellent. Cool. Thank you for that, Peg.
yeah, there's a different variety of levels that you can join on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions or comments?
Emily, Clarence.
Yeah.
You know, or for a few of us who have had jobs, multiple jobs
Yeah.
over many years, you know, it used to be, the mentality used to be that, well, one, you don't have a forever job anymore, right?
Right.
You know, most jobs, you know, 7, 8, 10, 20, right, before you transition. I mean, that was kind of maybe the older model, you know, perhaps some of our younger folks and millennials and so forth, you know, tend to job hop. Right, you know, I'm sure we all know colleagues who, you know, oh, I got promoted after a year, geez, right, and then, oh, I got another offer, you know, I'm off to my next career or next job at next corporation, you know, and they're bouncing around, right?
Yeah.
And it seems to be much more acceptable, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These days for companies. When you talked about gap jobs, you know, kind of plugging in, maybe working out of Starbucks,
Yeah.
until the next better gig or more permanent gig comes around. What are your thoughts about, you know, now, especially in this situation where they are trying to, you know, backfill some income before the economy turns around a little bit, or a better job offer?
Right.
Excuse me. What are your thoughts on how acceptable it is to take a gap job, knowing even your manager, right, or knowing that, you know, once the economy turns around, you're
Right.
gone, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So to speak to your first point, the newer model is largely because of the number of millennials in the workforce. They were not feeling terribly content to stay at jobs for a very long time, and had seen their parents go through this kind of assumption that they had a lifetime job, and then the parent would get laid off, or the parent would work themselves to death and just not get any huge benefit from it. And so the millennials entered the workforce with this idea that if my company is not going to be loyal to me, I have no great reason to be loyal to the company. And so a lot of millennials have kind of approached many jobs as places to build very specific skill sets. So you're absolutely right that there is less of an emphasis on holding a job for a longer time. Although generally I advise people to try to hold it for at least a couple of years, because a shorter period of employment doesn't look great to a lot of employers.
And
but
that's my point. Right.
Yeah. And that's kind of neither here nor there in this particular environment, because the economy is what it is. And so many people have lost their jobs right now that any employer who is going to count that against you is an employer that deserves not to survive this. It's a place where, like, I know people who have been in 25-year careers who lost their jobs because of this. And so it's not realistic for an employer to in any way count this against you. So a gap job is not going to look bad on your resume. And in fact, what you can do if you're concerned at all about that, or if you're trying to figure out how to make your resume not look like you want another barista job, is you can have a section at the front that's like your key skills summary, and you really outline what you're good at and what you've accomplished. And then under that, you can have a section that's called something like relevant work experience. And then that's where you really talk about the stuff that you want the employers to see. And then towards the bottom, I usually put it a little bit above education, but it's up to you. You can have a section that's called something like other work experience. And within each of those categories, you have a chronology, but you don't have the kind of old-fashioned, straightforward chronology where you start with your most recent job and just work backwards through time, because that's just going to make it look like you want to be an Instacart grocery deliverer for the rest of your life, and you probably don't. It might be really fun, but I think it's not as well paid as those folks deserve. And so you get to then adjust where you put that stuff on your resume. And I always say arrange your resume in order of importance. So the stuff that you really want the employer to see goes at the top. And since we're not talking resumes, I'll weigh in here with my own opinion about resume length. So I know that you all were told to keep your resume to 1 page, especially if you're new in your job. However, last year or the year before, I forget exactly, a professional resume writing organization called Resume Go brought in about 400 people who are somehow decision makers, hiring decision makers, and ran them through this very sophisticated series of tests and found that across the board, the people that they observed in this strongly preferred the 2-page resume. The gap was less significant when it was an entry-level job, but they still preferred the 2-page resume even for an entry-level job. So I'm saying go for 2 pages for what that's worth. All right, other questions, and if you don't want to share the question with the whole group, you're also free in the chat to send it just to me, or you can type it in there. Or feel free to unmute yourself and dive in. I'm glad to answer whatever other questions you have in our remaining 7 minutes here. Or concerns. I'm also happy to speak to concerns because it's a very concerning time.
Yeah, Emily, one of the things that I noticed that you didn't mention is network marketing as a possible support.
Mm-hmm.
The network marketing industry is actually recession-proof.
Right.
It really is. I'm stunned to tell you. I've been involved in that, in that industry for about 25 years.
Nice.
Retired school teacher, that's what I am. But
Excellent.
my company right now has had the highest sales, the biggest enrollment in the month of March. It's a 10-year-old company. And, you would expect, if you look at what was happening in our economy and what was happening to people in March,
Right.
that you would not have expected for them to be breaking records, right? So I'm curious, as a career person, what you speak to with people about that. I know that there's a lot of variables and many people have had maybe not very good experiences. One of the things you talked about that I love so much was the work culture. And I think that's, I think that's one of the things that can make a difference when if you're shopping that kind of an industry. And I didn't know you didn't mention that industry. So I was just curious about what your take is on that.
Yeah, I'm certainly glad to speak to that. I try in these kind of more informational sessions, I try not to speak too much to very specific career paths just because, I don't necessarily know who's on the call and I want the information to be broadly applicable, but you're right, that's definitely one of those fields that's generally seen as pretty recession proof. And I think the reason we're seeing the growth is that we're in an era where everyone realizes that we need marketing to happen. But a lot of that was kind of happening just by happenstance already in-house. And so people weren't necessarily planning for it or being terribly thoughtful about kind of how they were going to go about marketing plans in the future. So certainly when people bring up anything like that, I often get into very specific terms with them, but I tend not to start with it in case, I don't know, in case I have a person whose dream is to be a dancer or whatever, dental hygienist, something like
Right,
that.
right.
But it's definitely a really nice industry for that. And I think the culture part of it is also really key, because I think you can, there are a lot of jobs like that that are sort of more tech-based, but provide services that are tending to be more recession-proof. And so the main part there is just to learn as much as you can about that specific organization's culture, so that you know it's a good sort of cultural fit for you. But I love hearing stories like that, and I love that there are little highlights of success happening out there, because I think everyone feels so anxious and worried about everything there. So excellent comment there. For college students, we have a question here about recommendations for college students. Definitely what I'm telling everyone right now is for college students to use their career offices right now, which is of course virtual, but really important, because they're going to get a lot of kind of nurturing through this process. I tell you, my heart just breaks for seniors, college seniors right now, because you know, my alma mater is having its commencement online, and then they're figuring out how to do a virtual reunion. But I feel so bad for them, the students, because they don't get to be part of that wonderful pomp and circumstance that's so intrinsic to our values. But anyway, the point is, for college students, it's kind of similar work to what the rest of us are doing. A lot of networking, a lot of kind of putting different irons in the fire, but then get that nurturing through something like a college career center. Those are the people who are really able to do a lot of distance hand-holding, if you will, and to really get to know the individual students' needs as they kind of launch into the workplace. And let me hop into this next question, so I'm sure to answer it, but if you have a follow-up to that, let me know. But the other question is negotiating salary. Big question now. A lot of what I'm going to say about negotiating a salary, for right now, I'm going to go approach it as a normal approach to salary negotiation. If we do enter a recession, particularly if it's as bad as the most worried people are saying, it's going to change a bit, and I'm going to be encouraging people to negotiate more for things like benefits and titles than for salary, because I think if things do get really bad, the potential for increased salary will be much lower. But generally, the best way to negotiate a salary is to do some research beforehand to know what is a typical rate for your given field. I like salary.com and payscale.com. And those are both sites where you can, for free, go in and enter a job title and you're part of the world, your region, although they are US only. I have no particular advice if you're looking for a job in Canada or Scotland, but let me know. I'll find resources if you do want that. And so you go in and so you look up the jobs, and it'll give you a curve, a bell curve. And what you're looking for is the midpoint of that curve. That's your starting point for where you're going to negotiate your salary, because that's the median. And so then you'll go up. So you'll say, it looks like for someone with my background and level of education and whatever else you want to add to it, a normal starting salary is between X and Y, depending on benefits. Is there any room for negotiation? Essentially. I can fine tune that with you if you have other kind of questions or concerns about this, but that's kind of your basic approach to it. And I can go a little bit longer if you all have additional questions, but I also want to honor your time. So if you all need to go, please feel free to go. I promise I am not offended. Other questions that you have? Oh, and did I answer the college student question adequately? Let me know if I didn't.
Yeah, I asked the question, Emily, and I wanted to maybe just add that for my clients who are the big Fortune level folks now, the Raytheons and the Boeings and Lockheed Martins, they're actually wanting, to your point, they're actually wanting to engage even more because they see that their hiring pipeline cannot stop. Right. And so we're having these conversations, but I know that there are some internships that got stopped, or they're pivoting to a virtual kind of, so it looks very different from what they may have expected 2 months ago, right? But the folks are still that I'm talking to, the HR folks and talent folks are still very much interested in reaching into the colleges to maintain that pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, your Raytheons and those kinds of places, they can't just give up and close their doors. You know, there are a lot of industries that would be very harmed if they did that. So you're absolutely right. And especially those larger organizations and places that do a lot of government contracting, they have not slowed down at all, but they have changed how things look a little bit. And I'm curious, one of the things I was concerned about kind of going into this was whether the number of paid internships would decline. That was a bit of a hot button issue about 10 years ago because a lot of internships were unpaid. And people were talking about how unfair that was. And so it's really interesting to see what and how the changes are going to be with that. But anyway, thank you all so much for joining in today. Really appreciate it. Fran, I will send this info to you and to you too, Peggy, as soon as I can get it loaded onto YouTube, which depends largely on how quickly everything is working. But I really appreciate
So Emily, you're okay if we share?
Absolutely.
We could share. Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah, you can share
it was great.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you so much. I'll send you both the slide deck just as it is and the recording of this and a bunch of handouts and things as well. So excellent. All right. Thank you.
Emily, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
Thanks,
you all
Emily.
tuning in.
Great.
Take care. Stay safe and have a good rest of your work week.
Thank
You
you.
as well. Bye, everyone.
Bye.